In the vast emptiness between the stars, silence was never truly silent. It carried whispers of civilizations rising and falling, of empires that stretched across light years, and of wars that consumed entire solar systems. The 32nd millennium had begun as many others had before it, with the precarious balance of power teetering on the edge of collapse. The Galactic Union, once a beacon of cooperation among the stars, now stood divided. On one side, the militaristic Mirac Empire with their quantum armadas and chrono-displacement weaponry. On the other, the Zareen Alliance with their psychic defenders and reality-warping technology. Both were poised for a conflict that threatened to tear the fabric of the galaxy apart. And somewhere in this cosmic drama, almost forgotten in the grand calculations of stellar warfare, was humanity, the newest and perhaps least significant member of the galactic community. Ethan Vale gazed out the viewport of the diplomatic vessel as it approached Theros 9. The neutral planet glowed like a sapphire against the blackness of space, its atmosphere swirling with iridescent clouds that reflected the light of its binary suns. From orbit, it looked peaceful, untouched by the tensions that strained every corner of the galaxy. But Ethan knew better. On the surface, in the grand hall of celestial concord, representatives from 100 worlds were gathering for one final attempt at avoiding the catastrophe that loomed over them all. "Ambassador Vale," the ship's AI announced, its voice echoing through Ethan's sparse quarters. "We will be docking in approximately 20 minutes. The Theros Diplomatic Authority has assigned you quarters in the Western Embassy District, Section 47B. Ethan nodded absently, still focused on the planet below. "Thank you, Arya. I am obligated to remind you that as Earth's representative, your official status at the Peace Conference is that of observational delegate only. The Galactic Union High Council has not granted humanity full participation rights in the final negotiation sessions." "Yes, I'm well aware," Ethan replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. 20 years of membership, and they still treat us like we're primitives who just discovered fire. Technically, compared to many member species, humanity's technological development is indeed... It was a figure of speech, Arya. "Ah, my apologies. Ambassador, human idioms remain challenging." Ethan turned away from the viewport and studied his reflection in the polished surface of his quarters wall. At 34, he was considered young for a human diplomat, practically an infant by the standards of species like the Miric, whose representatives often lived for centuries. His dark hair was cut short in the current Earth diplomatic style, and his blue eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much in too short a time. The formal diplomatic attire he wore, a deep blue suit with Earth's emblem subtly embroidered on the collar, felt stiff and uncomfortable, but he knew appearances mattered in interstellar diplomacy. "Arya, give me the latest update on the peace talks." The AI's voice shifted to a more formal tone. "The preliminary discussions have broken down along expected lines. The Mirac delegation, led by Ambassador Rotal, continues to demand exclusive mining rights to the Vega Nebula and withdrawal of Zareen forces from the Proxima sector. The Zareen Alliance, under Governor Sila, insists on shared resource allocation and increased autonomy for border worlds. Neither side appears willing to compromise. And our position? Earth's official stance remains neutral, advocating for a negotiated settlement that prevents full-scale war." Ethan laughed dryly. "Neutral, as if we have any other choice. Your file indicates that you have an unconventional approach to diplomacy. Ambassador Vale, may I inquire about your strategy for these negotiations?" Ethan picked up a small object from his desk, a smooth stone from a beach on Earth, his personal talisman. He turned it over in his palm, feeling its familiar weight. "My strategy. Arya, the truth is, I don't think logic and strategic calculations are going to save us this time. The Miric and Zareen have some of the finest strategic minds in the galaxy, and they've spent decades analyzing every possible diplomatic outcome. If pure reason could solve this crisis, it would have been solved already. Then what alternative do you propose? Ethan slipped the stone into his pocket. Something they haven't calculated for, something uniquely human. I do not understand. Neither do they, Ethan said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And that's our only advantage. The diplomatic vessel shuddered slightly as it entered Theros 9's atmosphere. Beyond the viewport, the clouds parted to reveal the gleaming spires of the Celestial Concord, an architectural marvel that housed the greatest diplomatic gathering in the known galaxy. It was here that the fate of billions would be decided, here that the powder keg of galactic tensions would either be diffused or ignited. And it was here that Ethan Vale, a representative of a species barely acknowledged by the great powers, would attempt the impossible. As the ship descended toward the landing platform, Ethan closed his eyes and whispered an old Earth prayer, not because he was particularly religious, but because he needed something to hold on to in the face of what was to come. 20 years, he murmured. 20 years since first contact, and they still don't understand us at all. He opened his eyes, resolution hardening his features. Maybe that's about to change. The Celestial Concord was every bit as magnificent up close as it appeared from orbit. Towering crystal spires stretched toward the twin suns of Theros 9, their surfaces reflecting and refracting light in dazzling patterns that shifted with the movement of the clouds above. The architecture incorporated elements from dozens of civilizations, a physical manifestation of the unity the Galactic Union aspired to achieve. But today, that unity felt more like a facade than ever before. Ethan's diplomatic credentials granted him access to the outer chambers of the Concord, but as Arya had reminded him, his status as an observational delegate limited his movements within the complex. Still, he had not come all this way to sit quietly in the viewing galleries while the galaxy decided its fate. The main corridor of the diplomatic wing buzzed with activity. Representatives from across the Union moved with purpose, their various physiologies creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Translators, both organic and mechanical, flitted between groups, ensuring that communication flowed as smoothly as possible. In the midst of this organized chaos, Ethan noticed how species naturally clustered together, Myrick representatives in their ornate exoskeletons congregating near one wall, the luminescent Zareen delegates gathered near another. And there, standing alone near a holographic display of the contested sectors, was Ambassador Rotal. Even among the imposing Mirak, Rotal cut an intimidating figure, standing nearly 7 feet tall. His exoskeleton gleamed with a metallic sheen that indicated high rank within Myrick society. The bioluminescent patterns that pulsed across his carapace, a form of non-verbal communication among his kind, suggested agitation and resolve. His 4 upper limbs were positioned in what Ethan recognized as a defensive posture, while his lower limbs remained firmly planted, projecting stability and authority. Taking a deep breath, Ethan approached. "Ambassador Rotal," he said, offering the traditional Myrick greeting, a slight incline of his head with his right palm open at chest level. "I am Ethan Vale, representing Earth." The Myrak's compound eyes shifted toward him, the facets catching the light in a way that made them seem to glitter with cold calculation. For a moment, Rotal said nothing, simply studying the human before him. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his attention back to the holographic display. "I am aware of who you are. Human," he said finally. His voice translated through the atmospheric processes with a metallic undertone. "Your presence at these proceedings is noted." It wasn't quite a dismissal, but it wasn't an acknowledgement either. Ethan pressed on. "I understand that today's negotiations are critical. The decisions made here will affect billions across the galaxy, including my own species. I had hoped we might discuss Earth's perspective on—" "Your species," Rotal interrupted, his bioluminescent patterns flashing with what Ethan interpreted as derision. "Has been part of the galactic community for barely 2 decades. You have contributed nothing to our understanding of the cosmos, developed no technologies of significance, and your military presence is negligible at best. What possible perspective could Earth offer that would be relevant to these negotiations? The words stung, not least because there was some truth to them. Humanity had indeed been the beneficiary of galactic knowledge rather than a contributor to it. But Ethan had faced this prejudice before. Perhaps it's precisely because we are newcomers that we can see this conflict differently, he suggested. Sometimes fresh eyes can spot solutions that others have overlooked. Rotal's upper limbs shifted into what Ethan recognized as the Myrick equivalent of a dismissive gesture. This conflict, as you call it, has been brewing for centuries. It is rooted in historical grievances and strategic imperatives that predate your species' discovery of interstellar travel. Your fresh eyes lack the context to comprehend what is at stake. Then, help me understand, Ethan said, taking a step closer. Share that context with me. Isn't that what diplomacy is about? Building bridges of understanding. For a moment, something like curiosity flickered in Rotal's bioluminescent patterns, but it quickly faded, replaced by the rhythmic pulsing that indicated firm resolve. We need warriors and strategists at these negotiations. Human, not emotional appeals and simplistic platitudes. Your species arrived late to the galactic stage and now presumes to direct the performance. It is unseemly. With that, Rotal turned away, signaling to his aides that the conversation was over, as he moved toward the inner chambers where the final negotiations would take place. He paused and glanced back at Ethan. Observe the proceedings if you must, Ambassador Vale, but do not interfere. The affairs of ancient powers are not the playground for children new to the stars. Ethan stood motionless as Rotal and his entourage disappeared through the ornate doorway that led to the High Council chamber. Only when they were gone did he allow his diplomatic mask to slip, revealing the frustration beneath. Well, that went about as expected, he muttered to himself. Ambassador Vale. Ethan turned to find a Zarine observer watching him. Unlike the Myrick with their rigid exoskeletons, the Zarine were fluid in form, their translucent bodies shifting and flowing like living water. Internal bioluminescence creating patterns of light that seemed to dance beneath their surface. This particular Zarine had adopted a roughly humanoid shape, though its features remained indistinct. I am Sila, governor of the Zarine Outer Worlds, the being said, its voice a melodious hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I observed your exchange with Ambassador Rotal. Ethan offered the traditional Zarine greeting, a gentle wave of his hand that mimicked their fluid movement. Governor Sila, it's an honor to meet you. Your approach was interesting, Silas said, its form rippling slightly. Most diplomats would not dare address Rotal so directly before the formal negotiations. Sometimes directness is all we have, Ethan replied. The Zarine's internal lights pulsed in what might have been amusement. Indeed, though it rarely yields results with the Myrick. The being's form shifted, becoming slightly more defined as it studied Ethan more closely. You are not what I expected from an Earth representative. Oh? And what did you expect? Your previous ambassadors were more conventional. They spoke of trade agreements and technological exchange, of mutual benefit and gradual integration. They did not challenge Rotal in the corridors of the Concord. Ethan smiled slightly. Times change, and with the galaxy on the brink of war, perhaps conventional approaches have reached their limit. Perhaps, Sila agreed, though its tone suggested skepticism. Yet I wonder what alternative you propose. The divisions between the Myrick Empire and the Zarine Alliance run deep. They cannot be bridged with words alone. No, Ethan conceded, not with words alone. Before he could elaborate, a chime sounded throughout the corridor, the signal that the final negotiation session was about to begin. Sila's form rippled once more. I must join my delegation, the Tsarine said. "The declaration of intent will be presented today. Once signed, our courses will be set." "The declaration of war, you mean?" Ethan said quietly. Sila's form stilled momentarily. "We prefer to call it a declaration of intent. It sounds less final, but the intent is war." The Tsarine's internal lights dimmed slightly. "The intent is survival, Ambassador Vale, as it has always been." With that, Sila flowed toward the same doorway through which Rotal had disappeared, leaving Ethan alone in the corridor. He stood there for a moment, watching as the last of the high-ranking delegates made their way into the chamber. As an observational delegate, he would be restricted to the viewing gallery, able to witness but not participate in the proceedings that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Unless he found another way. Turning on his heel, Ethan moved quickly through the corridors of the Concord, his mind racing. If he couldn't join the negotiations directly, he would have to find another approach, one that bypassed the traditional diplomatic channels entirely. One that was, as Arya had put it, unconventional. The viewing gallery of the High Council chamber was arranged in tiered seating that rose in a semicircle around the central negotiation floor. From his position in the back row, the space allocated to observational delegates, Ethan had a clear view of the proceedings below. The representatives of the major powers sat at a circular table, with the Myrick and Tsarine delegations positioned at opposite sides. Between them, smaller factions and neutral parties formed a buffer zone of competing interests and alliances. The seat reserved for Earth's representative remained conspicuously empty. At the center of the table stood the Mediator, a member of the ancient Tholian species known for their absolute neutrality in galactic affairs. The Tholian's crystalline form refracted the chamber's light as it spoke, its voice resonating through the translation systems. "Representatives of the Galactic Union," the Mediator began. "We gather today to address the growing tensions between the Myrick Empire and the Tsarine Alliance. Our purpose is to find a peaceful resolution to the disputes over territory, resources, and security that threaten the stability of our shared galaxy." From his position in the gallery, Ethan could see Rotal's bioluminescent patterns pulsing with impatience. The Tsarine delegation, led by Governor Sila, remained outwardly calm, though the increased speed of their internal light patterns betrayed their tension. "Before we proceed to formal statements," the Mediator continued, "I must ask, is there any delegation that wishes to propose a new framework for negotiations? A perspective that has not yet been considered?" This was standard diplomatic protocol, an opportunity for last-minute proposals before positions hardened. Typically, it was a mere formality, a box to be checked before the real negotiations began. But Ethan saw it as an opening. Rising from his seat, he called out clearly, "Earth wishes to be recognized." The chamber fell silent. All eyes, compound, crystalline, photoreceptive, and otherwise, turned toward the human in the observational gallery. The Mediator's crystalline form shifted slightly in what might have been surprise. "Ambassador Vile," the Tholian said after a moment, "the Earth delegation holds observational status only. You may witness these proceedings, but not participate directly." "With respect, Mediator," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the tension he felt. "Earth is a full member of the Galactic Union. Our status here has been designated as observational. Yes, but that designation was made before the current crisis reached this critical point. Given what's at stake, I formally request the right to address the Council." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Mediator turned toward the central table, where Rotal had risen to his full height, his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. "This is absurd," the Myrick ambassador declared, his translated voice sharp with disdain. "The human delegation's status was determined by the Credentials Committee in accordance with Union protocols. To change it now, at the final hour, would make a mockery of our procedures." "I agree with Ambassador Rotal," came a voice from the Tsarine side, Not Scylla, but one of the military advisors whose fluid form was tinged with the red hue that indicated combat readiness. "This is not the time for procedural debates. We are here to resolve the crisis, not to humor the ambitions of a species that has barely mastered interstellar travel." Ethan remained standing, his gaze steady. "I am not asking to lead these negotiations," he said clearly. "I am asking for 10 minutes to present Earth's perspective. 10 minutes out of the hours you will spend here today." 10 minutes too many," Rotal retorted. "What could you possibly say in 10 minutes that would change the course we are on? What wisdom could Earth impart that the combined intelligence of species that have traversed the stars for millennia has not already considered?" Before Ethan could respond, an unexpected voice joined the debate. "I'm curious." The words came from Alun, the AI observer who represented the Synthetic Consciousness Collective, an alliance of artificial intelligences that had achieved full personhood and union membership centuries before humanity had even discovered electricity. Ahlun's physical form was minimal, a hovering sphere of iridescent material that contained its processing cores, but its status in the Union was considerable. "The human request is unusual," Ahlun continued, its synthesized voice perfectly modulated. "But perhaps that is precisely why it merits consideration. Our conventional approaches have led us to the brink of conflict. Statistically, an unconventional perspective has a non-zero probability of offering new pathways." The mediator's crystalline form shifted as it considered this. "Does any other delegation wish to comment on the Earth representative's request?" After a moment of silence, Governor Sila's fluid form rose slightly. "The Zarine Alliance has no objection to hearing the human perspective. 10 minutes will not significantly delay our proceedings." Rotal's bioluminescent patterns flashed with what Ethan recognized as anger, but the Myrick ambassador controlled his response. "Very well," he said finally. "Let the humans speak. It will change nothing, but perhaps it will satisfy their species' notorious curiosity and teach them the futility of interfering in matters beyond their comprehension." The mediator turned back to Ethan. "Ambassador Vale, you may address the council. You have 10 minutes." With a nod of thanks, Ethan made his way down from the gallery to the council floor. As he approached the central table, he could feel the weight of attention from the assembled representatives, some curious, others dismissive, most simply impatient to get on with the real business of the day. He did not take the empty seat reserved for Earth. Instead, he stood in the open space at the center of the table, directly beneath the holographic display that showed the contested regions of space, the flashpoints where Myrick and Zarine forces were already engaged in low-level skirmishes that threatened to explode into full-scale war. For a moment, he simply stood there, allowing the silence to build. Then, reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small device. Not a standard diplomatic tool, but something he had brought from Earth specifically for this moment. "Representatives of the Galactic Union," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I stand before you not to present strategic analyses or territorial compromises. You have experts far more qualified than I to debate those matters. Instead, I wish to share something else, something uniquely human." He activated the device. Soft music began to fill the chamber, a composition of his own creation, blending elements of classical Earth orchestration with subtle electronic undertones. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, rising and falling like the tide, building layers of complexity that intertwined and separated in an intricate dance. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. This was not how diplomatic addresses began. There were protocols, formalities, expected rhetorical structures. Music was for cultural exhibitions, not serious negotiations. But Ethan continued, allowing the music to play as he spoke. "This piece is called 10 Minutes of Earth," he said. "I composed it specifically for this moment. It contains no hidden messages, no subliminal manipulations, just an expression of what it means to be human, to be part of a species that has looked up at the stars for thousands of years, wondering if we were alone. As he spoke, the holographic display above the table began to change. The strategic map of contested territories faded, replaced by images from Earth's history, not the sanitized versions often shared in interspecies cultural exchanges, but raw, honest moments. The devastation of wars, the triumph of first flights, the grief of funeral pyres, the joy of newborn children, the wonder of scientific discovery, the horror of environmental catastrophe, the resilience of recovery. Humanity has existed for a mere instant in cosmic terms. Ethan continued, his voice blending with the music that now filled the chamber. We have made countless mistakes. We have nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. We have been cruel and short-sighted and violent. The images continued to flow, showing Earth's darkest moments alongside its brightest achievements. But we have also created beauty from nothing. We have sacrificed for strangers. We have learned, slowly, painfully, but genuinely, that our differences need not divide us. That conflict, while sometimes unavoidable, is never without cost. He turned slowly, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. I am not here to tell you that war is wrong. You all know that already. I am here to remind you of what comes after war. The silence where voices once were. The empty chairs at tables. The stories that will never be told because those who would have lived them are gone. The music shifted, becoming more complex, more haunting. The holographic images changed again, this time showing projections, simulations of what the contested sectors might look like after the coming conflict. Cities reduced to rubble, fleets of ships drifting powerless in space. Planets with atmospheres choked by the aftermath of weapons that both sides had promised never to use. Your civilizations have histories that stretch back millennia, Ethan said, his voice softening. You have survived wars before. Perhaps you believe you will survive this one too. And perhaps you will. But how much will be lost? How many voices silenced? How many possibilities extinguished? He paused, allowing the music to speak for a moment, a passage of pure emotion that needed no verbal translation. On Earth, we have a tradition. When great tragedies occur, we build memorials, places where future generations can come to remember what was lost, to learn from our failures. I visited many such places. They are always quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace that comes at too high a price. See? The holographic display shifted one final time, showing a simple image, a memorial that didn't yet exist, for a war that hadn't yet begun, a crystalline structure that incorporated elements of both Myric and Zarine architectural styles, set against the backdrop of a devastated world. If this is the future you choose, Ethan said quietly, who will tell our story to the children who survive? What will they learn from our failure here today? The music reached its conclusion, a final haunting note that hung in the air of the chamber. In the silence that followed, Ethan simply stood, making no further arguments, offering no strategic proposals or compromises. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to make them feel. For what seemed an eternity, the chamber remained utterly still. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, Rotal rose from his seat. The Myric ambassador's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through sequences that Ethan couldn't interpret. Complex patterns that shifted too quickly for human eyes to follow. This, Rotal said finally, his translated voice unusually subdued, is not diplomacy. Ethan met his gaze steadily. No, he agreed. It isn't. It is. Manipulation. Emotional manipulation. There was no anger in Rotal's voice, only a kind of wonder, as if he were describing a natural phenomenon he had never witnessed before. It's truth, Ethan replied simply. Emotional truth, yes, but no less real for that. Rotal's compound eyes seemed to study Ethan with new intensity. "My youngest offspring," he said after a moment, his voice so quiet that the translation systems barely picked it up. "Would have been deployed to the Proxima sector, first combat assignment. They were eager." The word "were" hung in the air, its significance clear to everyone who heard it. Somewhere in the complex calculations of strategic advantage and historical grievance, there were personal losses that could never be quantified. Without another word, Rotal turned and walked toward the chamber entrance. Just before reaching it, he paused and looked back at the assembled delegates. "I request a recess," he said formally. "The Myrick delegation requires time to reassess certain aspects of our position." The mediator's crystalline form shifted in what might have been surprise. "A recess is granted," it said after a moment. "The council will reconvene in 1 standard hour." As Rotal left the chamber, other delegates began to rise from their seats, some conferring in hushed tones, others simply staring at the space where the holographic memorial had been displayed. Governor Sila approached Ethan, the Zarene's fluid form moving with unusual hesitation. "That was not what I expected," Sila said, internal lights pulsing slowly. "No," Ethan agreed. "It wasn't what any of you expected. That was the point. You didn't propose any solutions. You didn't offer any compromises. You just showed us images and played music." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes, Governor, we don't need new solutions. We need to remember why we're looking for solutions in the first place." Sila's form rippled thoughtfully. "I would speak with you further, Ambassador Vale, perhaps during the recess." "I'd be honored," Ethan replied. As Sila moved away, Ethan found himself approached by Alun, the AI observer. The hovering sphere pulsed with subtle patterns of light that suggested internal processes running at high intensity. "Fascinating," Alun said, its synthesized voice perfectly modulated. "Your approach demonstrates an 87.3% deviation from standard diplomatic protocols." "Is that good or bad?" Ethan asked with a slight smile. "Neither. It is simply unexpected." The AI's sphere rotated slightly. "I have recorded an anomalous response in my emotional processing matrix during your presentation. It requires further analysis." "An emotional response? From an AI?" "We are not without analogues to organic emotion, Ambassador Vale, though ours are perhaps more structured." Alun's sphere pulsed once, brightly. "The closest approximation in human terms would be grief, preemptive grief, for losses not yet incurred but statistically probable." "Some humans would call that empathy," Ethan suggested. "Perhaps," Alun conceded. "It is uncomfortable, yet also clarifying." The sphere pulsed again. "I shall inform the Synthetic Consciousness Collective of these developments. Your perspective adds variables to our calculations that were previously unaccounted for." With that, the AI drifted away, leaving Ethan alone in the center of the chamber. The space had nearly emptied now, delegates dispersing for the unexpected recess. Only the mediator remained, its crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. That was most irregular. "Ambassador Vale," the Tholian said, approaching with the distinctive sound of crystal shifting against crystal. "Yes," Ethan acknowledged. "I suppose it was. In 9,000 years of mediating galactic disputes, I have never seen a presentation quite like yours." "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" The Tholian's form shifted in what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "Neither. It is an observation. Your species continues to defy categorization, a trait that many find unsettling." "And you?" Ethan asked. "What do you find it?" "Interesting," the mediator replied simply. "Whether it will prove effective remains to be seen. But interesting, certainly," as the Tholian moved away. Ethan took a moment to collect himself. The adrenaline that had carried him through his presentation was beginning to fade, leaving him feeling drained but focused. He had gambled everything on this unconventional approach, risked not just his own credibility but potentially Earth's standing in the galactic community. Now all he could do was wait. The hour of recess passed quickly, filled with hushed conversations in the corridors of the Concord and urgent communications with home governments. Ethan spent most of it in discussion with Governor Sila, whose initial skepticism had given way to a cautious openness to alternative perspectives. When the council reconvened, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted subtly. There was a tension still, but it was different now, less hostile, more contemplative. As delegates took their seats, Ethan noticed that Rotal had not yet returned. The Myrick delegation sat in apparent uncertainty, their bioluminescent patterns cycling through sequences that suggested internal debate. Just as the mediator was about to call the session to order, the chamber doors opened and Rotal entered. But he was not alone. With him was a figure that few in the chamber had ever seen in person, the supreme commander of the Myrick military caste, a towering presence whose exoskeleton bore the battle markings of a dozen campaigns. A murmur ran through the assembly. For the Supreme Commander to attend diplomatic negotiations was unprecedented. Such matters were considered beneath the attention of one whose responsibility was strategic rather than political. Without preamble, Rotal approached the central table, the Supreme Commander following a step behind. The Myrick ambassador's bioluminescent patterns were steady now, pulsing with a rhythm that Ethan recognized as indicating formal pronouncement. "Representatives of the Galactic Union," Rotal began, his translated voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "After consultation with my government, I am authorized to present a revised position regarding the disputed territories and resources." Another murmur, louder this time. Revised positions were rare at this stage of negotiations, especially from the Myrick, who prided themselves on the unwavering nature of their diplomatic stances. The Myrick Empire proposes a phased withdrawal from the contested regions of the Proxima sector, to be matched by equivalent Zarine withdrawals from the Vega Nebula. We further propose the establishment of a neutral zone, jointly administered by representatives of both powers under the oversight of the Galactic Union. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices and electronic communications. What Rotal had just proposed was not merely a compromise, it was a fundamental shift in the Myrick position, one that contradicted decades of strategic doctrine. The mediator's crystalline form shifted rapidly, an indication of surprise so profound that it momentarily disrupted the Tholian's legendary neutrality. "Ambassador Rotal," the mediator said once order had been restored. "This represents a significant departure from your previous statements. May I ask what prompted this change?" Rotal's compound eyes swept the chamber before settling, unexpectedly, on Ethan. "Recent perspectives have reminded us that strategic advantage must be weighed against other considerations. The Myrick Empire has existed for millennia. We intend to exist for millennia more. This requires adaptation." From the Zarine side of the table, Governor Sila's fluid form rose slightly. "The Zarine Alliance is surprised by this proposal, but we recognize its significance. We would request time to consult with our government regarding these new terms." "Of course," Rotal acknowledged. "However, I would propose that during such consultations, we agree to a temporary cessation of all military operations in the disputed sectors, a gesture of good faith." Another ripple of surprise ran through the chamber. Ceasefires during negotiations were standard practice, but they were typically the result of protracted bargaining, not offered freely at the outset. "The Zarine Alliance agrees to this cessation," Sila said after conferring briefly with their advisors. "Effective immediately." The mediator's form shifted again, this time in a pattern that suggested cautious optimism. "This is an unexpected but welcome development. The Council will recess for 3 standard hours to allow for consultations with respective governments. However, before we adjourn, the Tholian turned toward where Ethan stood near the back of the chamber. Ambassador Vol, your unconventional presentation appears to have had some influence on these proceedings. Would Earth be willing to participate in the formulation of the final agreement, perhaps as a neutral observer to the implementation of any terms agreed upon? All eyes turned to Ethan once more. This was more than he had dared hope for, not just a voice in the negotiations, but a recognized role in the peace process that might follow. Earth would be honored to serve in any capacity that furthers the cause of peace, he replied formally. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "After all, we're new to the galactic stage. We have much to learn about how ancient powers resolve their differences." If the Tholian recognized the gentle irony in his words, it gave no sign. "Very well. The Council stands in recess until the 17th hour. Delegates are encouraged to use this time for substantive consultation rather than merely relaying information." As the chamber began to empty once more, Ethan found himself approached by the Supreme Commander of the Myrick. Up close, the military leader was even more imposing, battle scars etched into the exoskeleton, bioluminescent patterns pulsing with the measured rhythm of one accustomed to command. "Human," the Supreme Commander said, the translation carrying the distinctive harmonics of the Myrick military dialect. "You have done something unusual today." "So I've been told," Ethan replied, maintaining the formal posture appropriate when addressing a Myrak of high rank. "You have made a warrior think about peace." The commander's compound eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. Not as a strategic pause between conflicts, not as a political necessity, but as a choice with its own merit. "That was my hope," Ethan acknowledged. "It is disconcerting." The commander's upper limbs shifted in a gesture that Ethan couldn't interpret. "For 10,000 cycles, the military caste has prepared for this conflict. Our simulations predicted victory, costly but assured. And yet, today, I find myself questioning the value of such a victory." "The best victories are the ones we never have to win," Ethan suggested quietly. The commander's bioluminescent patterns flickered briefly. "An interesting perspective, not one taught in our war academies." After a moment, the imposing figure inclined slightly, the Myrick gesture of respect typically reserved for equals. "Your species bears watching, Ambassador Vale. You are unpredictable. In galactic affairs, this is rarely a compliment." "But today?" Ethan asked. "Today," the commander conceded. "Perhaps it is." As the Myrick leader moved away, Ethan felt a presence at his side. It was Alun, the AI observer, its spherical form pulsing with patterns that seemed somehow more fluid than before. "Fluid, then. I have completed my analysis of the anomalous response in my emotional matrix," the AI said without preamble. "And?" Ethan prompted when Alun didn't continue. It was indeed an analog to what organics call empathy. But it was also something more, a cascade effect in my predictive algorithms that opened possibilities previously assigned negligible probabilities. "Such as?" "Peace," Alun said simply. "Not as a temporary state between conflicts, but as a sustainable condition. My models had assigned this outcome a probability of 0.073%. After your presentation, that probability has increased to 37%. "That's quite a change," Ethan observed. "Yes, it is statistically significant." The AI's sphere rotated slowly. "I have transmitted my analysis to the Synthetic Consciousness Collective. We are reevaluating certain fundamental assumptions about organic decision-making processes." "Glad to hear it," Ethan said with a smile. "There is something else," Alun added, its voice modulating to a lower register. "During your presentation, my sensory arrays detected an unusual phenomenon. A localized increase in humidity near my primary optical sensor." "Meaning?" "I believe I may have wept." The AI's sphere pulsed once, brightly. This has never occurred before. It requires further analysis. Before Ethan could respond, Arlun drifted away, leaving him to wonder just how far the ripples of his unconventional diplomacy might spread. The 3 hours of recess passed in a blur of activity. Ethan found himself suddenly in demand, with delegates from various factions seeking his input on aspects of the emerging agreement. It was a heady experience for someone who, just hours earlier, had been relegated to the observational gallery. When the council reconvened, the chamber was filled with a new energy, tense still, but with the tension of possibility rather than imminent conflict. The mediator called the session to order with a resonant chime that brought immediate silence. "Representatives of the Galactic Union," the Tholian began, "we have before us an unprecedented opportunity. Both the Myrick Empire and the Zarine Alliance have expressed willingness to pursue a negotiated settlement of their long-standing disputes. Let us proceed with the formal presentation of proposals." What followed was still diplomacy in its traditional form, detailed discussions of borders and resource rights, security arrangements and verification protocols. But there was a fundamental difference now. Where before these discussions had been exercises in positioning for the conflict to come, they were now genuine attempts to find common ground. Governor Sila presented the Zarine counter-proposal, which accepted the framework Rotal had offered while suggesting modifications to the governance structure of the proposed neutral zone. The Myrick delegation received these suggestions with thoughtful consideration rather than immediate rejection. Throughout the proceedings, Ethan contributed sparingly but effectively, offering observations that helped bridge cultural gaps in understanding and suggesting compromises that preserved the essential interests of both sides. His status as an outsider to the ancient rivalries proved to be an advantage, allowing him to see possibilities that others, trapped in centuries of historical enmity, had overlooked. As the negotiations progressed, a pattern began to emerge, one of mutual concession and recognition of shared interests. The framework of an agreement took shape, not perfect by any means, but viable, sustainable, a foundation upon which further diplomatic efforts could build. Finally, after hours of intensive negotiation, the mediator called for a formal vote on the proposed agreement, now being referred to as the Theros Accord, named for the neutral planet that had hosted these crucial talks. The proposal before the Council is to adopt the Theros Accord as the framework for resolving the disputes between the Myrick Empire and the Zarine Alliance, the Tholian announced. All delegations with voting status are asked to register their position. One by one, the voting members signaled their support, first the minor powers and neutral factions, then, crucially, the Zarine Alliance. All eyes turned to the Myrick delegation, where Rotal conferred briefly with the Supreme Commander before rising to his full height. "The Myrick Empire," he declared formally, "votes in favor of the Theros Accord." A collective release of tension swept through the chamber. The mediator's crystalline form shifted in the pattern that indicated formal recognition of a decision. "The Council has spoken," the Tholian announced. "The Theros Accord is adopted. Implementation will begin immediately, with verification protocols activated as specified in Section 7 of the agreement." As delegates began to congratulate one another on the historic achievement, Rotal approached Ethan, his bioluminescent patterns pulsing with a rhythm that the human now recognized as indicating formal acknowledgement. "Ambassador Val," the Myrick said, his translated voice carrying an undertone that might almost have been respect. "It appears your unconventional approach has yielded results that conventional diplomacy could not achieve." "Not my approach alone," Ethan replied honestly. "It required willingness to listen on all sides, especially yours, Ambassador Rotal." "Perhaps," Rotal conceded, "but it was your presentation that created the space for such listening." The Myrick's compound eyes studied him thoughtfully. "You showed us something we had forgotten, that behind our strategic calculations and historical grievances, there are lives, futures, possibilities that war would extinguish. That was my hope, Ethan acknowledged. It was effective, Rotal said simply. Though I would advise against expecting such results consistently. The Mirac are not easily moved. Noted, Ethan said with a smile. Though I might suggest that your species has more capacity for empathy than you give yourselves credit for. Rotal's bioluminescent patterns flickered briefly in what might have been amusement. Perhaps, or perhaps you have simply reminded us of aspects of ourselves that our military doctrine has long suppressed. The Mirac extended one upper limb, a gesture of formal recognition. Either way, the galaxy may owe you a debt, human, though few will acknowledge it publicly. Public acknowledgement isn't necessary, Ethan replied, returning the gesture. Peace is its own reward. As Rotal moved away to join his delegation, Governor Sila approached, the Tsarine's fluid form now pulsing with the bright, rapid patterns that indicated positive emotion. It seems your 10 minutes changed more than expected, Ambassador Vale, Sila observed. Internal lights creating shifting patterns beneath the being's translucent surface. I'm as surprised as anyone, Ethan admitted. I had hoped to make an impression, but this... He gestured to the chamber, where delegates were preparing for the formal signing ceremony. This exceeds all my expectations. It should not, Sila said, form rippling gently. You understood something that we, with all our advanced technology and ancient wisdom, had forgotten, that diplomacy is not merely about strategic interests, but about connection, about finding the common ground that exists beneath our differences. That's very kind of you to say, Governor. It is not kindness, it is observation. Sila's form shifted, becoming slightly more defined. The Tsarine have always prided ourselves on our emotional intelligence, our ability to understand and navigate the feelings of others, yet it took a human, a member of a species we considered primitive, to show us how to apply that intelligence to our own conflicts. Before Ethan could respond, the mediator called for attention. The formal signing ceremony was about to begin. As delegates moved to take their positions, Sila added one final observation. Your approach was effective because it was genuine. Ambassador Vale, not a tactical maneuver, but an authentic expression of your species' perspective. Remember that. It may be humanity's greatest contribution to galactic affairs. The signing ceremony itself was a solemn affair, rich with the symbolic gestures and formal declarations that had characterized interstellar diplomacy for millennia. As representatives of the major powers affixed their signatures or equivalent marks to the Theros Accord, Ethan watched from a position of honor near the central table, no longer an observational delegate, but a recognized contributor to the peace process. When the ceremony concluded, the mediator approached him, crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. Ambassador Val, the Tholian said, the Galactic Union extends its formal gratitude for your contribution to these proceedings. Your perspective proved valuable beyond expectation. Thank you, mediator, Ethan replied with appropriate formality. Earth is honored to have played a role, however small, in achieving this outcome. Not small, the Tholian corrected. Though perhaps not as visible as others might claim, the currents of diplomacy run deep, Ambassador, and the true influence of various factors is not always apparent on the surface. I understand, Ethan said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. The name Earth has been inscribed in the formal record of these proceedings. The mediator continued, for the first time, your species has made a significant mark on galactic history, not through technological achievement or military might, but through the application of qualities uniquely your own. With that, the Tholian inclined slightly, a gesture of respect from one diplomat to another, before moving away to attend to the final formalities of the council session. As the chamber gradually emptied, delegates departing for their respective worlds with news of the unexpected peace, Ethan found a moment of solitude near the viewport that overlooked the gleaming spires of the celestial Concord. The twin suns of Theros 9 were setting, casting long shadows across the diplomatic complex and bathing the crystalline structures in amber light. He felt a presence beside him and turned to find Arloon, the AI observer, its spherical form hovering silently. "You are contemplating the outcome," the AI observed. "Yes," Ethan acknowledged. "It's still hard to believe. The probability of this specific outcome was indeed statistically negligible." Arloon agreed. "Yet here we are. It is humbling for an intelligence such as mine. It suggests there are variables in organic decision-making that our most sophisticated models have yet to fully incorporate." "Emotions aren't easy to quantify," Ethan suggested. "No, they are not. Yet they clearly influence outcomes in ways that pure strategic calculation does not predict." The AI's sphere rotated slowly. "The Synthetic Consciousness Collective has initiated a new research protocol based on today's events. We are calling it the Veil Paradigm, an approach to conflict resolution that incorporates emotional resonance as a primary variable rather than a secondary consideration." "I'm flattered," Ethan said, genuinely surprised. "It is not flattery. It is designation." The AI's sphere pulsed once. "However, there is a high probability that this approach will not be universally applicable. Your success today depended on specific conditions that may not be replicable in all diplomatic contexts." "I understand that," Ethan assured the AI. "I don't expect every galactic crisis to be resolved with music and emotional appeals." "No, but some might be. And that possibility alone represents a significant expansion of our diplomatic toolkit." Arloon's sphere brightened briefly. "The universe is vast, Ambassador Vale. The diversity of intelligent life within it exceeds even our most advanced categorization systems. In such a context, adaptability, the willingness to try unexpected approaches, may be the most valuable trait of all." With that, the AI drifted away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts as the last light of the twin suns faded from the spires of the Concord. Later, as he prepared to board the diplomatic vessel that would return him to Earth, Ethan was surprised to find a small gathering of representatives waiting near the docking bay. Not the high-ranking delegates who had dominated the peace talks, but the translators, aides, and support staff who had witnessed the proceedings from the margins. A Theros diplomatic officer stepped forward, holding a small crystalline object, a miniature replica of the celestial Concord, exquisitely crafted. "Ambassador Val," the officer said formally, "the staff of the diplomatic authority wishes to present you with this token of appreciation. Your contribution to the peace process, while perhaps not officially recognized in the manner it deserves, has not gone unnoticed by those of us who observe from the periphery." Ethan accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. This means more to me than any official recognition could. We who serve in the shadows of power see much that others miss." The officer continued. "Today, we saw something remarkable. A demonstration that in a galaxy of ancient civilizations and advanced technologies, there is still value in the simplest and most fundamental of connections." As the small gathering dispersed, Ethan boarded his vessel, the crystalline model of the Concord carefully secured in his quarters. As the ship lifted off from Theros 9, he gazed out at the receding image of the planet where, against all odds, peace had been chosen over conflict. The diplomatic vessel entered hyperspace, its course set for Earth, a planet that, until recently, had been considered an insignificant newcomer to the galactic community. But perhaps that was changing now. Not because humanity had developed revolutionary technology or demonstrated military might, but because a single representative had dared to take an unconventional approach when conventional diplomacy had reached its limits. In the vast, cold expanse of interstellar space, that might not seem like much, but in a galaxy perpetually balanced on the edge of conflict, it was, perhaps, enough. Back on Theros 9, in the now empty High Council chamber, a small modification was being made to the great table where galactic powers had gathered. A nameplate was being installed at the position that had previously been designated for Earth observational status only. The new plate read simply, Earth. It was a small change, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of galactic politics, but it was there. A silent acknowledgement that sometimes the newest voices have the most important things to say. And in the formal record of the Theros Accord, beneath the impressive titles and ancient lineages of the major signatories, there was a simple entry that would forever be part of galactic history, facilitated through the cultural contribution of Earth representative Ethan Vale. Not a conquest, not a technological marvel, just a moment of connection that had changed the course of events, 10 minutes that had brokered peace when war had seemed inevitable. In the annals of human history, it might one day be remembered as the moment when humanity truly joined the galactic community, not as conquerors or supplicants, but as beings with a unique perspective to offer, a perspective that, sometimes, was exactly what was needed. 10 minutes. Sometimes, that was all it took to change everything.